This week on MCrider, we're going to focus on brand new riders and discuss some tips that many riders forget as soon as they walk out of the new rider class. So tip number 1, perform a pre-ride routine. A lot of riders get a motorcycle with the idea of commuting back and forth to work because it'll be cheaper and with less hassle over driving a car. So while the idea of just hopping on that motorcycle and heading to work might seem appealing, it's not quite the reality. So every rider should have a regular routine before heading out to work or that weekend stress-reducing ride. But if you build that routine into your riding habit, your routine can actually be the start of your stress reduction before you ever throw a leg over a motorcycle. So first you need to perform a pre-ride safety check of your motorcycle. So I've got a complete list of the items that you'll want to check on your motorcycle on a regular basis. You can find that checklist at mcrider.com/tclocks. So TClocks is an acronym that the MSF uses to help remember the things that you should check on your motorcycle. In short, TClock stands for tires and wheels, controls, lights and electric, oils and fluids, chassis, and stands or kickstands. So it's a list of things that you should check before you head out on a motorcycle. That full list can be found at MCrider.com. And it's important to check these items on a regular basis before heading out, especially your tires and tire pressure you want to check every time before you go. The second part of that pre-ride routine should be putting on your riding gear. A motorcycle doesn't care how far you're planning on riding it. You're at the same risk at the end of your driveway as you are 50 miles away from home. So before your rear end hits the seat, make sure you have your protective gear on. At a minimum for me, that's a full face helmet, riding jacket, gloves, and over-the-ankle boots or shoes. So tip number 2, learn to use both brakes properly. Many beginners fall into the trap of favoring one brake over the other. It's usually the rear brake, but both brakes serve a purpose, and learning how to apply them together smoothly gives you better control and shorter stopping distances. So get comfortable practicing progressive braking with both the front and the rear brakes in a straight line before you ever need it in an emergency on the street. The front brake is your primary stopping brake as it provides the most stopping power. The rear brake is your control brake or your finesse brake, and it helps balance the motorcycle for slow speed maneuvers and U-turns. When stopping though, develop the practice of using both brakes every time you stop. Using both brakes for every stop develops muscle memory so that you're more likely to use both brakes in an emergency situation when you need maximum stopping distance. Tip number 3, learn what the friction zone is and when to use it. I've seen this scenario many times over the years when teaching a class. A student comes to a class with years of riding experience. They may not have their motorcycle endorsement yet, or they might already be licensed, but they're returning to take the class alongside a spouse or a child. But as soon as any exercise requires slow speed controlled riding, especially on the U-turn exercise, those experienced riders try to perform the exercise controlling the motorcycle totally with the throttle and not using the clutch at all. When the instructor reminds them of the friction zone, they either say, oh yeah, because they had a class and they forgot about the friction zone, or it's a totally new experience or concept to them. Either way, it's proof that a large percentage of riders, with or without formal training, do not use the friction zone for slow speed controlled riding out on the street. So just to make sure we know what the friction zone is, if I squeeze the clutch handle all the way in, I've removed all power from the rear wheel. If I give it a little bit of throttle and slowly release that clutch, at some point I'll begin to get some forward momentum or forward power going to that rear tire. That's the start of the friction zone. If I continue to release that clutch, it's going to get more and more power to the rear tire, giving me more forward momentum until I fully release the clutch and I've got full power going to the rear tire. But that point between where I'm beginning to get power and where I get full power, that little gap in between there is called the friction zone, where I'm getting partial power to the rear tire. And that, my friend, is the key to slow speed control of a motorcycle. So my advice to new riders is to keep practicing with the friction zone. even after taking the new rider class. On the street, you can get away with rarely needing to use the friction zone, unless, of course, you need it for slow speed control. And how do most new riders crash or drop their motorcycle out on the street? In situations where slow speed control is necessary. Things like moving forward in traffic at a stoplight or at a gas pump, or pulling into a parking lot, or attempting to make a slow speed sharp turn either left or right. These are situations where the friction zone would be a huge help, and many riders don't know to use it or don't remember to use it to control the motorcycle at slow speed. They try to do it with the throttle alone, and the motorcycle jerks, or jumps around, and they end up dropping the motorcycle, losing some confidence in the process. Tip number 4, scan 10 to 12 seconds ahead. Most new riders have experience driving a car before they ever get a motorcycle license, and they attempt to use the same road strategy on the motorcycle that they've used in their car. Part of the problem in doing this is the change of risk that they don't account for. So here's a scenario to help explain that. A driver in a car is riding close behind a vehicle in front of them with limited view up the road. The car in front drives over a huge piece of rubber, perhaps from an 18-wheeler or a flat tire of a car ahead of them. The driver in the car behind them could also straddle that piece of rubber, or at worst, they hit the rubber with their front bumper and they listen to it clatter as it comes out the back end of the car, usually with no damage to the car as they drive over it. A rider on a motorcycle attempts to do the same exact thing, riding directly behind a car in front of them. The car passes over the rubber, but that motorcycle is much more likely to crash in that same scenario. Or the tire could catch them in the leg. It could cause a crash by getting hung up in the tire and fender of the motorcycle or the chain of the motorcycle. So the exact same scenario, but the risk to the motorcycle rider is much higher, which requires some strategy change for the rider of the motorcycle. One of the biggest changes for a rider is looking further up the road and positioning your motorcycle so you can see further up the road. If you ride in traffic or in the city, this is a mandatory skill or road strategy for you to develop. So a rider should be looking 10 to 12 seconds ahead or actively working to position their motorcycle so that they can see 10 to 12 seconds ahead. For a car driver, limited visibility increases the risks of minor incidents, but for a motorcyclist, it can be a matter of life and death because you can't avoid what you can't see. Tip number 5, never stop learning and practicing. In the MSF classes I used to teach, there were brand new riders, there were riders with some experience, and oftentimes they had a lot of riding experience, but they'd been riding illegally without a license, and there were riders who were coming back to the class as a means to continue growing and developing their skills as a rider. So let's take the new rider out of that conversation. So we're left with 2 different riders with significant riding experience. The one is there to get their license and the other was there to continue training. Without a doubt, the rider who is coming back to continue to grow their skills as a rider was a significantly better rider than the one who is there just to get their license, even if they had approximately the same amount of riding experience on the street. I've said this several times on this channel. When you're riding, and when you're training, they're not the same. So in a 30-minute practice session, I can practice emergency braking, I can practice swerving, I can practice a brake and escape, I can perform U-turns, and I can do that more times in 30 minutes than I will ever need to use it in 5 years of riding on the street. The problem is I don't know on the street when I'm going to need those particular skills. So if I haven't practiced them in a long time, they're not going to be there whenever I need them. So make it a practice to continue developing your riding skills. The best way you could do that is in a class with an instructor. If that's not available or possible, or in addition to taking classes with the trainer, become a member of MCrider, get access to the field guide, or order the field guide book or road strategy books and continue learning and developing your skills out on the street. New rider or experienced rider, it does not matter. We can all learn and continue to grow and develop our skills through regular training and practice. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road. If you enjoyed this video, please consider becoming a member of MCrider. You get access to the forums and the field guide and a whole lot more. All the details can be found at mcrider.com/member.